Hey guys, I wanted to do this video for you on the most influential speakers from my experience. Doesn't necessarily mean that these are the best speakers, although some of the later ones that I show you kind of are from my experience. But it doesn't also mean it's the most influential speakers in the industry. These are just what got me into audio that I want to discuss. And please excuse me if my voice is a little frail right now. I actually got diagnosed, believe it or not, with the coronavirus. I was visited by a potential sponsor for the Audioholic Smart Home, and they failed to mention that they visited China before visiting me, and now I'm infected and I'm quarantined. I'm going crazy. I've been really sick for the last 7 or 8 days, but that doesn't stop me from working. I'm not one that just sits in bed all day long, so I'm between Tylenols, I'm trying to do these kind of videos. So anyways, I want to share my screen with you, and I want to go over kind of the history of speakers that I grew up with. So I want to start with, it's kind of funny when I look at these speakers now. Back when I was a kid, and I'm talking about the late 70s, my brothers were into audio. And that's how I got into audio. I would go to my brother's rooms. They'd have these giant speakers. There's a company called Criterion. There was a house brand called Lafayette in New York. So it's kind of not really a white van, but just not really a name brand product. And they had these speakers, the Criterion 2002 Pluses, and they had a 12-inch paper woofer, a big horn, I guess that's a mid-range, and then 2 tweeters. Talk about comb filtering. Of course, back in the 70s, they didn't know anything about that. They just figured put as many drivers as you can in the box and you're good to go. Well, the impressive thing about these speakers that blew me away as a child was seeing the woofers go in and out, oscillating. I mean, I just loved seeing that. That's what got me into audio. I would go into their room and I could actually smell the paper cones, and I really liked that. But the one thing that was really impressive was my brother was playing an ELP record. I think it was Brain Salad Surgery. And the organs just happened to resonate at a certain frequency, and it made my dad's wine bottle on the floor explode. So they were in the basement playing this, and literally it resonated the floor just at the right frequency that it made his wine bottle explode. So that was my start for audio. I always wanted to have a pair of these speakers as I grew older, but I was, maybe about 8 years old at the time, so this was beyond my reach. So then moving on, I started getting into Cerwin Vega. And this is back when I was in high school. And I remember going to McDuff's, which was a local retailer in Florida, and they had the entire Cerwin Vega D series speakers. And I was just blown away by the D9s. They had a big 15-inch woofer with that red surround, tons of bass, 2 mids, and a horn-loaded tweeter. But I, of course, couldn't afford these speakers at the time. So I saved up as much money as I could when I was in like 9th or 10th grade, and I got a pair of the D2s, which were a 10-inch two-way. And that was my start for getting my first, I guess, real pair of speakers. I thought they were good at the time because they had decent bass output. It wasn't until I pulled them apart and saw that there was only a capacitor in series with the tweeter, and that was the extent of the crossover. And I realized how limited the speaker was as I started learning more about audio. But it did serve me well throughout high school, and but I started to refine my taste as I moved on. And that's when I discovered Polk. Now, a friend of mine, my brother's friend, had a pair of Polk Monitor 10Bs, which had, I think, 2 6.5-inch woofers, their metal dome tweeter, and then a 10-inch passive radiator. And I remember listening to them in his basement, and he listened to a lot of jazz records because he was a jazz drummer. And I was really enamored with the performance. It was obviously much better than what I was hearing with the Cerwin Vegas. But I couldn't afford the Monitor 10Bs, but I did like the Monitor 5 Junior Pluses because there were bookshelf speakers. They had a same 6.5-inch woofer and then a 6.5-inch passive. And these were really good performing bookshelf speakers. I think they were about $400 a pair at the time. So yeah, that was another speaker that kind of influenced me, got me more into audio. Then I fell in love with JBL. And the JBL L100T3 were, in my opinion, the benchmark of their time. They had that 12-inch Aquaplast woofer. And I remember reading in Stereo Review magazine about how much was involved by JBL in testing that woofer. Huge motor structure on it. They had the titanium tweeter, and I think a 5¼ inch mid-range. And a buddy of mine, his dad owned these. He was a neurologist, and he would put them on at his house, and we'd listen to Steely Dan records. I think we listened to Asia, and I just could not believe how tight the bass was. It was a much more refined sound than I was used to hearing from, you know, like the Cerwin Vegas of the time. Just better clarity in the mid-range, much better highs. But this was another speaker I couldn't afford. I think they were like over $2,000 a pair. So I went to Circuit City and I did the next best thing. I wound up working at a Publix, being a bag man when I was in 10th or 11th grade. And I got a pair of JBL LX44s, which were kind of the poor man's version of the L100 T3s. You know, they didn't have quite the bass capability. They had an 8-inch woofer instead of a 12. Similar kind of tweeter and mid, you know, obviously not to the same caliber. But this was a really good sounding speaker, and it got really high ratings in Consumer Reports at the time. And I chose this speaker over the Cerwin Vega AT12s at the time. So Cerwin Vega had a newer series out, but my taste started becoming more refined, and I wasn't going more for crazy amounts of bass. I wanted to hear a balance of sound, and I always thought the JBL sound in this series was the best value for the money, and this really sustained my audio hobby. I really enjoyed listening to these speakers, especially when I threw better amplification at it. I went from a Pioneer 4500S 100-watt receiver to a Rotel 2-channel amp, and I could not believe how much more control that the system had when I switched to a better amp that I borrowed when I worked at a stereo shop. So these speakers lasted all the way until I was pretty much done with college. But while I was in college, I still went to the different stereo shops, and I aspired to have better speakers. And I remember the B&W Matrix series. I think these are the 801s. I personally thought these speakers sounded better than the newer ones, like the 801s Ds, D2s or whatever they were. I just really liked the mid-range in this speaker. I thought they were kind of ugly looking, but I did like the sound. Again, this was a speaker that was way out of my budget. But I would go in and I would listen to them for, you know, hours at a time and just kind of enjoy the experience. So that was another influential speaker. I was realizing how much mid-range clarity that was coming out of a speaker like this. And that was kind of the thing I was searching for next. Well, a friend of mine introduced me to a brand called Legacy Audio. And at the time they had a pair of Classics, which they have. The Classic line now doesn't have as many drivers in it. It's a smaller tower now. So at the time, this Classic had I think that was a 10 or a 12 inch on the front, and then another bass driver on the back, along with a tweeter. And then it had this, you know, a mid-range tweeter, and then the AMT. And this speaker just blew me away with not only the bass. I mean, the bass that was coming out of his system was just amazing, but just the clarity of the speaker. I always aspired to have Legacy speakers when I was in college, but I couldn't afford them at the time. But it got me thinking about audio. It got me thinking about when I graduated college, what kind of direction I was going to go, because I knew I had the audiophile affliction. I knew I could never settle for less, that I would have to have some type of a speaker like this one day. So that's when I met RBH after I graduated college. I think I called them just to find out about a subwoofer. Got a subwoofer from them. I was very impressed with it. And then one of the designers is like, you should really try out a pair of our Decimo bookshelf speakers. He had a pair of B stock. So when they shipped me these speakers, you know, it was an unknown to me. Like, I didn't want to go to a bookshelf speaker. I wanted a tower. But he told me because I had a good subwoofer, I could use bass management and I could get really good sound. And at the time I was in a bedroom, so I didn't have my own house yet. And when I put these speakers on for the first time, and I was dating my wife at the time, I never understood what people would talk about, how a speaker can disappear into your room, until I heard these speakers. And that's what these speakers literally did. They disappeared into the room, and the sound just emanated like it was there. And I've had these speakers now literally for 20 plus years. So I haven't changed them. I still use them in a family room system. But these were really a magical speaker. They didn't play super loud. They didn't play super deep. They needed a subwoofer. But what they would do in a small room on a pair of stands was just unbelievable. Still to this day, one of my favorite bookshelf speakers. And this is what really made me become an audioholic. This was probably one of the most influential speakers in my experience. Then I heard the Snell A7s when I was in a trade show, I think in the early 2000s. And I fell in love with this speaker. I heard it at a couple of different demos. They were spinning vinyl, and it just, the clarity of these speakers was amazing. The bass was really tight. Snell was a no-nonsense company back in the day. It saddens me to see that the brand just kind of went away and nobody revitalized it, because they had some great engineering. And you notice they have a Diablito driver array, the MTM. And I'm a big fan of MTMs, as I told you guys in the past. I do believe you need more surface area for the mids, and that's what you get with a speaker like this, along with controlled vertical dispersion. They use really high quality drivers. This was expensive, this speaker. It was like 30 grand a pair, but I'm telling you, the experience at the demo rooms were pretty mind-numbing. So this was a really influential speaker, again, just elevating the high end to me, and really liking the concept of a flagship tower that could do everything right. And then, of course, my most recent speaker was the Status Acoustics 8T. This is an RBH speaker again. This was is an incredible speaker. I've never heard a speaker that could do some of the things that this speaker does. The bass, for example, was just amazing. Like, I literally didn't have to do much EQ at all to make it sound right. Like, the bass was just so tight, so dynamic, so deep. And then the mid-range clarity, with having 4 mids like that and kind of an MTM array, along with that beryllium tweeter, which is just silky smooth tweeter. Just such a great sounding speaker. I kind of got really sad when I switched this over to the new SVTRS system that I'll be talking about soon, the active speakers from RBH. But I do see the future of speakers and its active, and the ability to tune a speaker to the room and to just do so many different things you can't do with a passive speaker like this. I will always miss this speaker. This is probably still to this day my favorite speaker that I've ever had the luxury of owning, listening to, and reviewing. So that's my short list. I'm kind of curious as to what you guys find the most influential speakers that you grew up with, that got you into audio. Again, I apologize, I'm pretty drawn out right now, so trying to get better with this coronavirus thing. So guys, please comment down below. Tell me what you think. Tell me what your favorite speakers are. What got you into this audio hobby, or audioholic addiction, if you will. Don't forget to subscribe to our Patreon at patreon.com/audioholics. And until next time, my friends, keep listening.